What if the one destined to rule the world was cast away by her own father, not out of hatred, not out of fear, but because of one man's greed, hidden beneath a mask of wisdom? This isn't a fairy tale where the princess finds her prince and they ride into the sunset. No, this is a story of betrayal wrapped in prophecy, of a father forced to choose between his daughter and the doom foretold by the stars, and of a spiritual guide, the one man trusted by the king who secretly wanted it all for himself. But destiny has a strange way of playing favorites. Sometimes it blesses those who least expect it and punishes those who think they can control it. In the heart of a powerful kingdom, a beloved daughter stood at the center of a prophecy that could change the fate of empires. And when the stars whispered her future, it didn't bring celebration, it brought fear. So the king made a choice, a cruel one, and with tears in her eyes, the princess was sealed in a chest filled with jewels, not to die, but to float away, guided by the river and fate. But fate, as always, had a plan. What followed was a journey filled with twists no one could have predicted. A prince with a pure heart, a bear in disguise, and a lesson so sharp that even the most powerful sage fell to his knees. This story isn't just about kingdoms and crowns. It's about the thin line between faith and manipulation, love and control, greed and righteousness. It's about what happens when we try to rewrite destiny, and how sometimes the very trap we set for others becomes our own undoing. So buckle in, because this tale starts with a king, but it ends with something far more powerful. Let's begin. The kingdom was thriving. Markets bustled with trade, fields stretched golden under the sun, and laughter echoed through palace courtyards. Under King Virendra's rule, peace had not only returned, it had flourished. But within the walls of that grand palace, the king himself walked restlessly, his face shadowed by a burden no one could see. He had everything, wealth, wisdom, power, everything, except peace of mind. It wasn't a war that troubled him. It wasn't rebellion or drought. It was something far closer to his heart. His only daughter, Princess Aarya, had come of age, and yet no suitable match could be found for her. Not because suitors didn't exist. In fact, many came from distant lands with riches, armies, and titles. Princes and nobles lined up at his gates, each hoping to win her hand and with it, the blessings of a mighty kingdom. But none felt right. There was something about her fate, something unexplainable. Every time a potential match was considered, something would go wrong. A prince fell ill. A neighboring kingdom backed out of the alliance. Even the royal astrologers gave vague, unsettling answers when asked about her future. And so, the princess remained unmarried. King Virendra loved his daughter dearly. She was not just his child, she was his pride. Strong-willed yet graceful, intelligent yet kind. She walked with the calm confidence of royalty, but her laughter could still brighten the darkest corners of the palace. To him, she was not just a princess, she was his hope. One evening, the king stood alone in his chamber, gazing out at the distant horizon. The sun dipped below the hills, casting long shadows that crept across the palace floors like silent doubts. That's when he heard the gentle sound of footsteps, measured, deliberate. The door creaked open. "Your Majesty," said a familiar voice. It was Raj Guru, the royal spiritual advisor. His saffron robes flowed behind him like whispers of ancient truths, and his eyes sparkled with the wisdom of decades. "You seem troubled." King Virendra turned slowly. I am, he admitted. My heart is heavy, Raj Guru, my daughter. I've searched every kingdom, met every prince, yet none seem worthy. I fear there is something beyond my understanding at work. The Raj Guru folded his hands, eyes narrowing slightly. Then perhaps it's time we consult the stars. At first, the king hesitated. He had already asked the palace astrologers, and none could offer clarity. But Raj Guru's presence was different. He had guided the kingdom through droughts, invasions, and betrayals. If anyone could understand divine timing, it was him. And so, the princess's horoscope was summoned in ancient parchment sealed with sacred markings, written at the hour of her birth. Raj Guru held it delicately, almost reverently, as he unrolled it and began to read. His lips moved silently, his eyes scanning the celestial patterns as his fingers traced the inked lines like a man decoding fate itself. At first, he said nothing, but then his breath caught. The king noticed it immediately. "What is it?" he asked, stepping forward. Raj Guru's eyes widened slightly, then quickly returned to calm. "Her destiny," he whispered, "is extraordinary." "What do you mean?" Raj Guru paused, weighing his words carefully. "According to her chart, whoever marries her will rise beyond imagination. A prince may become a king may become an emperor, and an emperor may rule the entire world." The room fell silent. King Virendra looked stunned. "That powerful?" The Raj Guru nodded slowly. "Yes, but power of that scale comes with consequences. Fates like hers are rare and dangerous." The king sat down, his face unreadable. He didn't know whether to feel proud, afraid, or both. But he also didn't notice the flicker in Raj Guru's eyes, the faintest glimmer of something darker than wisdom, greed. Raj Guru said nothing of what truly passed through his mind at that moment. He had seen many horoscopes in his life, but never one like this, never one that promised so much so clearly. And as the thought bloomed inside him, it began to consume everything else. If someone else marries her, they will rule the world. But what if I were the one? He was not a young man, nor a warrior, but he was powerful, respected, feared even. His words could bend kings, and his influence reached every corner of the realm. Why should he, the king's most trusted man, let this fate go to someone else? And so the lie was born. "My king," he said suddenly, changing his tone, "there is a problem." The king looked up sharply. "What kind of problem?" Raj Guru leaned forward, voice grave. "Her fate is bright, yes, but not for your family. The alignment suggests that while her husband will rise, her own bloodline may fall. If you marry her off, your kingdom could suffer." The king went pale. "She is like fire," Raj Guru continued, "powerful, beautiful, divine, but fire can burn. It is best to let destiny choose her path. Don't try to control it." "What are you saying?" the king asked, struggling to understand. She stared at him, frozen. "I must let you go," he whispered. It took her a moment to absorb the words. Her fingers tightened. "Let me go." "Go where?" "To fate. To the river," he said. "You will be placed in a sacred chest and released into the river's arms. The man destined for you will find you. This is the only way to protect our kingdom." Arya's breath caught in her throat. She stepped back slowly. "You're sending me away, in a box." Her voice cracked, but she fought the tears. "Why, father? What have I done?" "You've done nothing," he said, his voice shaking. but I cannot risk our bloodline. I trust the Raj Guru. He has seen the signs. Your marriage might bring greatness for your husband, but destruction for us." Arya's face hardened, a quiet resolve rising behind her pain. "And so I must be cast away like a curse." The king had no answer. She turned and walked out, not screaming, not begging, only silent. That silence said more than words ever could. But while the palace mourned what was about to happen, somewhere else in the shadows, the Raj Guru smiled. In his private chambers, he sat alone, candlelight flickering across the walls, illuminating the parchment of her horoscope once more. He read it again and again, and each time his hunger grew. There it was, written in the stars, "The one who marries her shall rise beyond kingship, rise to command the world." His heart pounded. "This is my chance," he thought. "Why should I watch another man ascend when it could be me?" But he also knew he couldn't just take her now, not openly. The king trusted him too deeply, and the people revered him. He couldn't risk suspicion, so he had woven the perfect lie. The prophecy was real, but the warning, the curse, all invented. The idea of the river was brilliant, romantic, poetic, spiritual, and completely believable. Because what better cover than fate? Once the chest was in the river, he had already planned his next move. He would send his most loyal disciples downstream to intercept it. They would bring it quietly to his quarters, and by the time anyone realized where the princess had ended up, it would be too late. He had even prepared the words for the king. "Destiny has chosen her path," he would say. "She has returned not to a prince, but to a holy man. This must be divine will." It would be seen as a miracle. The princess married to the kingdom's spiritual pillar. The king's hesitation would be dismissed by priests, politicians, even the public. They would call it fate. But what Raj Guru didn't see, what he couldn't see, was that fate had already begun to weave its threads. Threads stronger than ambition. Threads that wound through rivers, through forests, through royal hearts that beat with truth, not greed. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the temple bells echoed across the city, Princess Aarya sat inside the massive, ornate chest. It had been built of sacred sandalwood, adorned with emeralds, gold coins, and symbols of protection etched into every corner. It looked like a gift from the gods, but it felt like a coffin. She sat still, her hands in her lap, her eyes fixed forward. No more tears, no more pleading. She had done her crying already. The lid closed slowly, and the darkness embraced her. The chest was lifted by 12 royal guards and carried through the palace grounds, toward the river that shimmered silver under the moonlight. The people watched in stunned silence, confused and heartbroken, whispering prayers they didn't fully understand. The king stood at the water's edge, lips pressed shut, his hands trembling at his sides. With a final command, the chest was released. It floated gently at first, then caught the current and began to drift away, taking with it not just the princess, but the burden of prophecy, the weight of deception, and the fate of two men who had made opposite choices, one blinded by greed, the other waiting, unknown to all, just beyond the bend of the river. The Raj Guru watched from his tower, hidden behind his curtain, a twisted satisfaction curling on his lips. "Soon," he whispered, "very soon." The river whispered as it carried the sacred chest forward, a low, ancient lullaby, known only to time and water. Beneath the moon's gentle gaze, the golden box shimmered, its jewel-studded lid catching stray glints of starlight like a floating constellation. Princess Aarya sat within, surrounded by gold and silk, yet cold and alone. Her back rested against embroidered cushions, but her thoughts raced far from comfort. She couldn't see where she was going, nor did she know if she would ever stop. All she heard was the sloshing of water and the wooden creak of the chest, gently rocking with the current. Each mile downstream felt like a chapter closing on her. Past her palace, her father, her name, her identity. Would she be remembered, or had she already become a ghost in the kingdom's memory? Above her, the night air cooled as the river passed through forests and cliffs. Owls hooted from treetops, and wildflowers leaned in over the banks as if to catch a glimpse of the girl hidden within the chest. She closed her eyes and thought of her mother, her warmth, her laughter. "Trust the wind," she used to say. "It knows where to take those who listen." But tonight, there was no wind, only water and silence, until, far ahead, on the opposite side of the forest, another story was quietly unfolding. Prince Arjun, heir to the kingdom of Devgad, was camping beside the river with his hunting party. The day had been long, filled with tracking wild boars and exchanging playful arrows with his companions. They had laughed, wrestled, and feasted around a roaring fire. But now, the forest was still, and only a few embers remained as glowing reminders of their revelry. Arjun stood at the edge of the river, rinsing his hands. The moon lit his face, strong jaw, alert eyes, and a quiet gentleness not often found in royalty. His armor lay discarded near the tent, replaced by a plain cotton tunic. He wasn't a man who clung to crowns. He believed in strength, but more in fairness. He had fought battles, but preferred peace. And tonight, he found peace in the simple rhythm of flowing water. Then something caught his eye. A glimmer, no, a glow. Something, floating gently toward the bend. At first, he thought it was driftwood catching moonlight, but as it approached, he saw shape, edges, ornamentation, admudges, story K, Hualisi, har choti, say choti, scene Ka, prompt, right krdo, image, attractive ho, 8K, image ho, prompts, English mean, ho 10, a chest. His eyebrows drew together. Devon. He called out softly to one of his soldiers. The man stirred from near the fire. "Yes, my prince. There's something in the river." "Look," Devon rose, squinting. "By the gods, is that gold?" Arjun didn't wait. He grabbed a rope and jogged to the edge. As the chest floated closer, he waded into the cold water, the fabric of his tunic soaking quickly as he reached out and pulled it toward the shore. It was heavy, ridiculously so. By the time they got it onto land, several men had gathered. They stood around it, breathless, intrigued. The chest was sealed, but not locked. Etchings of divine symbols lined its lid. Emeralds were embedded at each corner. One of the younger soldiers whispered, "Is it a gift from the heavens?" Another muttered, "Or a trap?" Arjun brushed his hand along the surface. Only one way to know, and slowly, carefully, he lifted the lid. The scent of sandalwood escaped first, and then stillness. Inside, bathed in the softest glow of moonlight and surrounded by silks and coins, sat a young woman, eyes closed, her breath slow and steady like a sleeping flame. For a moment, no one moved. The world felt suspended. Then her eyes fluttered. Open, they were wide, deep, and filled with fear. She sat up slowly, clutching the edge of the chest, looking around at the circle of strange faces. Prince Arjun stepped back, raising his hands gently. "You're safe," he said softly. "I'm Arjun, Prince of Devgad. You're among friends." She blinked, her voice catching in her throat. Where am I? You've just come ashore, he said. You were floating in this chest. Alone. Who are you? Her lips trembled. I am Arya, daughter of King Virendra of Vardampa. Gasps echoed around them. Vardampa. One of the men said, That's nearly 200 miles upstream. Arjun looked at her again, this time not with caution, but with wonder. How did you end up in a chest? Her eyes fell to her lap. My father was told my destiny would ruin our family, so he sent me away into the hands of fate. A stunned silence followed. No one spoke until Arjun stepped forward and knelt before her. I don't know what the stars say, he said, but I know what I see. She looked at him, startled. I see someone who didn't give up, who trusted fate, and fate brought you to me. She bit her lip, eyes welling up. But this time, the tears were of relief. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a golden ring, something he had worn since childhood. He held it up. If the stars have brought us together, then I won't question them. Arya, will you stay? Will you marry me? Her breath caught. Not because of the proposal, but because of how simple, honest, and fearless it was. She nodded slowly. Yes. And just like that, in the heart of the forest, beneath a moonlit sky, surrounded by stunned soldiers and fluttering leaves, two strangers joined their fates. Not out of duty, not out of manipulation, but out of choice, far away from the forest. Beneath the towering domes of Vardampa's palace, the Raj Guru paced across the floor of his dimly lit chamber. The windows were sealed, the incense thick, and the candles flickered nervously as though they sensed what was coming. He could feel it in his bones. The chest would arrive any moment now. His students had followed the river's path for days, ready to retrieve it the moment it drifted into their trap. According to his plan, they were to bring it directly to his chamber, quietly, without alerting the king or palace guards. Everything had to be done under the veil of secrecy. And so far, it had gone perfectly. Soon, the girl would be in his possession. The prophecy would become his truth. And when the time came to reveal her presence, he would emerge not as a manipulator, but as a man chosen by destiny. A holy union. He imagined the court poets calling it a spiritual marriage forged by fate. Who would question it? Who would dare? Outside, hurried footsteps echoed. He straightened, smoothing his robes. The door creaked open. A student stepped in silently, bowed, and whispered, "It's here." The Raj Guru's chest swelled with triumph. "Bring it in." The chest was rolled in by 4 of his strongest disciples. It looked exactly as it had when it left the palace, sacred, glowing, untouchable. He felt his hands tremble as he approached, it not with fear, but with anticipation. His heart pounded like a drum in his ears. This was the moment. "Place it in the center," he ordered. They did. "Now listen carefully," he continued, voice lower, sharper. "I must open this chest in complete solitude. No one must interrupt me. No matter what you hear, no matter what I say, do not enter this room until I call for you personally. Is that clear?" His students exchanged nervous glances, but nodded. "Good," he said, and slowly shut the heavy doors behind them. He turned toward the chest. He let out a slow, shaking breath. His palms pressed together in prayer, to the gods, but to his own ambition. He had waited so long for this, played the part of the wise man, the advisor, the priest. But now, he would become something greater. Slowly, reverently, he unlocked the chest. The lid creaked open, and then everything unraveled. There was no soft fragrance of sandalwood, no golden silks, no divine glow. There was a roar, a deep, blood-chilling roar that shook the very walls of the chamber. His eyes widened in horror. Inside the chest, staring straight at him with wild, furious eyes, was a massive bear, its teeth bared, its fur matted, its claws thrashing at the sides. The Raj Guru stumbled back in disbelief. What is this?" The bear lunged. He screamed. The creature tore through the ornaments of the chest and pounced with terrifying speed. Swiping across the air as the Raj Guru barely dodged, he fell to the floor, crawling backward, eyes wide with panic. "Help!" he shrieked. "Open the door. Open it now." Outside, the students stood frozen. One looked at the other. "He said not to open it." Another replied, "He told us, no matter what." "But he's screaming." "We follow orders," one said, jaw clenched. He insisted. Back inside, chaos had erupted. The bear had cornered him, clawing at drapes, smashing furniture, roaring with every breath. It wasn't a random attack, it was fury released, like nature avenging the lie he told. "Please," he begged, ducking behind a pillar. "I am a holy man. This isn't how it was meant to go." But fate, it seemed, had no pity left for him. Every scream, every crash echoed through the stone corridors. The bear chased him in circles, tearing through his chamber like it was made of paper. He tried using spells, mantras, even threw holy water from a silver bowl, but the beast didn't care. It only grew more enraged. He tripped. The bear pounced. A claw slashed across his robes, grazing his shoulder. He howled in pain. Outside, the students shifted nervously. "Should we go in?" one finally asked. "No," the head disciple said firmly. "He warned us. He begged us not to interrupt. No matter what, this must be part of his ritual." Inside, it was no ritual. It was judgment. As the Raj Guru scrambled behind a wooden table, flipping it over in desperation, his voice cracked with desperation. "You fools, open this door. I command you." The bear smashed the table in half with a single blow. The Raj Guru threw a vase. It shattered. The bear didn't flinch. He had no weapons. No escape, only fear. And the cruel irony that the chest he prepared for the princess had become his own undoing. Minutes passed like hours. Screams turned to groans, roars to silence. And finally, nothing. Outside the room, the students stood in frozen horror. Then, one of them whispered, "Do you smell that?" Another sniffed, blood and incense. They stared at the door, still shut, still locked from the inside. Inside the room, the Raj Guru lay crumpled in a corner, breathing raggedly, his robes torn, his body shaking. The bear had not killed him, but it had made sure he would never walk the same again, or stand with pride, or plot. And as he lay there, moaning in pain, his own words echoed back in his ears, words he had used to deceive the king. Let destiny choose her path. Fate had listened, it had chosen, and it had not chosen him. Morning broke gently over the riverbanks of Devgad. The mist rose in soft curls, like nature's own breath exhaling peace into the forest. Birds stirred in the treetops, and the first rays of sunlight spilled across the damp grass and sleeping tents. But Prince Arjun had barely slept. He sat by the campfire, staring at the ring on Arya's finger, watching the way it caught the morning light. She slept in one of the tents nearby, guarded not by swords, but by trust. The men who once followed him into battle now bowed respectfully to her as if she were already queen. And perhaps, in a way, she was. The prince smiled faintly to himself. He had always believed in destiny, but he had never thought it would arrive. Floating on a river, wrapped in silence and sorrow. Yet here she was, strong, graceful, and forged by circumstance. When Arya finally emerged, she looked rested, though her eyes still held traces of the weight she had carried. But there was something new as well as something light. Not joy, not yet, but possibility. "Good morning," she said softly. Arjun stood. "I hoped the bed was better than the chest." She laughed. It was the first real laugh since they had met, and it rippled through the air like sunlight on water. "I haven't slept so peacefully in weeks," she admitted, or laughed. He nodded. "Then let's give you more reasons to laugh." That morning, they rode together, just the two of them through the forest trails. The silence between them was not awkward, but calm, complete, as if they had skipped months of courtship and landed directly into something deeper. At a quiet clearing near a stream, Arjun finally turned to her. "We can go back to Devgad today," he said. "I'll present you to my father. There will be questions, ceremonies, announcements, but only if you want this." She looked at him, her voice steady. "I do, not because the stars said so, but because I choose you." And that was how it began, not in a royal hall, not under banners and blessings, but in a forest clearing, with two people looking each other in the eye and saying yes without a throne between them. Back in Vardhanpur, however, the palace was unraveling. The Raj Guru had not emerged from his chambers in over a day. Servants whispered of strange sounds, blood-stained carpets, and a shattered table. But no one knew what had happened, not officially. The king, though consumed with worry for his daughter, had heard nothing from the disciples he had sent downstream. No word, no sign. It had been days. Every night he sat by the palace balcony, staring at the river, wondering, did she find safety? Or did I send her to ruin? And then, just as the silence threatened to consume the kingdom, a royal envoy arrived. It was from Devgad. The scroll was sealed with gold and the prince's own insignia. King Virendra's fingers trembled as he broke the seal and read the letter aloud. "To His Majesty King Virendra of Vardhanpur, this letter reaches you with tidings of fate fulfilled and fortune restored. Your daughter, Princess Aarya, lives. She is safe, honored, and loved. It was I, Prince Arjun of Devgad, who found her. Guided not by maps, but by the river of destiny you trusted. We wish to formalize our union with your blessing and invite you to our kingdom to witness not just a wedding, but the joining of two futures shaped by faith, with honor and hope." Prince Arjun, the king, fell to his knees, tears running down his cheeks. Not out of shame, not out of guilt, but gratitude. She was alive. She had been found. And more importantly, she had chosen. That very day, he ordered the palace gates opened, flowers woven into garlands, drums to be prepared. A royal caravan was ready to ride to Devgad, led by the king himself. But before he left, he made one quiet stop. The Raj Guru's chambers. He knocked, no answer. The guards pushed open the doors. What they saw inside was not the man they once revered. The Raj Guru sat slumped in the corner, wrapped in torn robes, eyes empty, face pale. His hand was bandaged. His chamber was in ruins. The king stepped forward. "What happened to you?" The Raj Guru didn't speak. Not at first. Finally, he whispered, The chest you gave me, it wasn't what I expected. The king narrowed his eyes. What did you expect? But he already knew. The Raj Guru said nothing, only lowered his head. I trusted you, the king said, his voice quiet but firm. You told me she was a threat, but she wasn't. You were. No anger, just truth. He turned and walked out, leaving the man behind, not in prison, but in a silence heavier than chains. In Devgad, the city was alive with celebration. Banners flew, music echoed through the streets, and petals rained down from balconies. People sang not because a prince was getting married, but because fate had brought them a story worthy of legends. Arya stood in the grand courtyard, dressed in crimson and gold, her eyes scanning the crowd until they found her father's. When they met, no words were needed. He bowed his head not as a king, but as a father finally at peace. The ceremony was brief, sacred, and stunning. When Arjun and Arya joined hands, the wind stirred gently, and for a moment, even the gods must have paused to smile. That night, as they stood on the palace balcony, Arya leaned against Arjun's shoulder. I still wonder, she whispered, what would have happened if someone else had found the chest? He smiled, but they didn't. She nodded. Maybe that's what fate really is, not just a path, but the people who meet you along it. He kissed her forehead, and the ones who walk beside you after. As the stars blinked over Devgad that night, the kingdom slept in rare silence, the kind that follows the ending of a storm. And in the heart of the palace, two souls who once floated toward the unknown now stood firmly rooted in love, grace, and something far greater, destiny fulfilled without destruction. But beyond the celebration, beyond the wedding chants and golden petals, the true story lived in the silence between breaths, in what was lost, in what was nearly stolen, and in what was ultimately saved, not by power, not by prophecy, but by character. Because this wasn't just a tale of a princess and a prince. It was a story about choice, about what a man does when given a chance to manipulate fate, and what another does when handed the same fate, but chooses honor instead. The Raj Guru believed he could twist destiny with his bare hands. He believed the stars could be bent to match his desire. He thought if he wore the mask of wisdom long enough, he could hide the monster underneath. But destiny isn't gold to be hoarded. It isn't a river to be redirected. And it isn't a princess to be locked inside a box. It's a mirror. And when the Raj Guru looked into that mirror, all he saw was greed. He wanted to rise without being worthy. He wanted glory without sacrifice. And in doing so, he sealed his own collapse, not because of the bear, but because of the hunger that had already eaten him alive from the inside. He wanted to be chosen by the stars, but he forgot the stars only guide. They do not obey. Now let's talk about the prince, Prince Arjun. He had no vision, no prophecy. He wasn't waiting beside the river with a crown in his hand and a dream of thrones. He was just living, humble, curious, present. And when the chest arrived, he didn't see treasure. He didn't see a kingdom. He saw a person, a frightened girl in a gilded prison, a soul, not a symbol. He didn't ask what her dowry was. He didn't care what fortune might follow her. He knelt before her, not because of her bloodline, but because of her truth. And in doing that, he became the kind of man worthy of the stars, not because he chased destiny, but because he respected it. And then there's Arya, the girl they tried to erase from her own story, told she was dangerous, told her love would bring ruin, told her only silence would protect her family. But she didn't break, even as the lid closed, even as the river carried her away, even when the world said, "You are a risk." She didn't drown in despair. She didn't scream for rescue. She listened, she waited, she trusted, not blindly, but bravely. And in the end, it was her resilience that saved everyone. Not her beauty, not her birthright. Her ability to trust the river and still believe in herself. So what is this story really telling us? That fate isn't always fair. That people will lie to you, manipulate your path, and try to box your future into silence. But also that no one can steal what's written for you. Not a king, not a Raj Guru, not even time. If it's meant for you, it will find you, whether floating on water or walking through fire. And if it isn't, then it was never yours to begin with. It also tells us something even deeper, that greed wears 1,000 masks, sometimes even the face of a wise man. And that love, real love, doesn't scream, doesn't demand, doesn't chase, it waits, it listens. It shows up not when you ask, but when you need it most, just like the prince, just like the river, just like fate and the bear. Ah yes, the bear. Some will say it was just an animal, a wild beast caught in a prince's hunt. But maybe it was more. Maybe it was justice, in fur and fury. Maybe it was fate, as a final guardian, the one thing that couldn't be fooled by robes and rituals. Because in the end, truth needs no temple. It needs teeth. And in that locked chamber, behind golden walls and whispered lies, justice came. Not as a punishment, but as a mirror. So if you take anything from this story, take this. Don't fear the river. Don't worship false prophets. Don't chase stars meant for someone else. Instead, be like Aarya, strong in silence, graceful under pressure. Be like Arjun, noble without needing applause. And most of all, be like fate, unpredictable, patient, and always moving forward. Because no matter how dark the current, if your heart is clean, if your hands are steady, and if your soul is true, you will find the shore. Years passed, as years always do. The river still flowed through the forests of Devgad, silent, ancient, and unknowable. But those who lived along its banks no longer looked at it with fear or superstition. They saw it as something else entirely, a living memory, a sacred witness. Because it was no longer just a river, it was the river. The one that had carried a princess toward her fate. The one that had separated lies from truth. The one that had proven destiny could not be bribed, broken, or betrayed. And in both kingdoms, Devgad and Vardampa, that story lived on. Not on scrolls, not just in statues, but in the hearts of the people. They didn't tell it as a fairy tale. They told it as a reminder. Prince Arjun and Princess Aarya ruled together for decades, not as rulers consumed by power, but as partners, bound by principle. Their marriage didn't just unite two kingdoms, it mended what history had tried to break. Under their reign, the borders between Devgad and Vardhanpur softened. Trade flourished. Arts blossomed. Temples and schools were built across both lands, not in the names of kings, but in the names of truth and honor. But more than policies or politics, they changed something deeper, something that couldn't be measured in gold or laws. They changed the expectation of leadership. Where once rulers sought control through fear and prophecy, now they were expected to lead with clarity, compassion, and fairness. Aarya, in particular, became a symbol of transformation. The girl once locked in a chest became a queen whose voice echoed across councils and courts. Her speeches were not fiery, but firm. She taught young girls to read. She taught young boys to listen. And whenever someone asked her how she found her strength, she would say with a soft smile, "They tried to seal my fate in a box, but I listened to the river instead." As for King Virendra, he lived long enough to see his mistake turn into his greatest lesson. In his final years, he would often sit in the gardens of Devgad Palace, telling children stories of the time. He almost let fear dictate his choices. He never shied away from his guilt, but he wore it like armor, not to protect himself, but to remind others. Even kings can be wrong, but the wise ones make it right. He died peacefully, holding a painting of his daughter's wedding in his hands. He was buried beneath the flowering lime tree she had planted the week she became queen. And what of the Raj Guru? He was never publicly punished. There were no trials, no public disgrace, only exile, not to a desert, not to a cell, but to silence. He was stripped of his title and sent to a monastery far in the mountains, where no name held power, and no robe could disguise intent. There he spent his days sweeping floors, boiling water, copying scriptures he once pretended to understand. Some say he went mad, others say he found peace, but most believe he finally saw what he truly was, not a victim of fate, but a slave to greed. His name faded from memory, not erased, just ignored, as if the world itself chose not to speak it anymore, because not all villains are hated. Some are simply forgotten. Years turned to decades. Children became storytellers, and slowly the tale of the chest, the river, and the roaring bear became more than just history. It became myth. Some embellished it. They said the bear was a forest spirit sent by the gods. They claimed the river whispered the princess's name before she was ever born. They swore that when Arya and Arjun died, their souls became stars, two bright lights forever floating above the same riverbank where they first met. But beneath all the flourishes, one truth remained unchanged. Fate cannot be stolen, love cannot be forced, and truth always finds a way. And so, every year on the first full moon of spring, the people of both kingdoms gather by the river. They place floating lanterns into the water, one for Arjun, one for Arjun, one for the king who learned, and one for the river that led them all. Children sing, elders weep, lovers hold hands, and somewhere in the hush of twilight, if you listen closely, you might still hear the faint creak of a wooden chest floating quietly across the water, not as a symbol of sorrow, but of hope. Because this story, like all the best ones, doesn't end with power or death. It ends with a lesson. What is meant for you will always find you, but only if you're brave enough to let it come.